Those are the founders. But now let's look at the big unfolding international story, which is the confrontation between the United States and China, the superpower rivalry which has now emerged. We have to basically go back in time, think about the Spanish world supremacy. The Spanish world supremacy was reached sometime under King Philip II of Spain, maybe between the 1560s and about 1590 or 1600. They had something like world supremacy given their world empire. This was then beaten down by the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the revolt of the United Netherlands, and then ultimately by the successes of Henry IV of France in reuniting France and creating France as a counterpoise to the Spanish power. So that by about 1600, you could say that the Spanish supremacy in that absolute sense was clearly on its way out, although it took many more decades, and indeed the 30 Years' War, to seal the end of the Spanish supremacy, which then became hollowed out and collapsed. The French supremacy it starts with the Battle of Rocroi, R-O-C-R-O-I. This is the end of the Spanish-French prolongation of the 30 Years' War after 1648, so that we can say the French supremacy lasts from about 1660 to about 1700, 1705, when it's busted up by William of Orange and the Anglo-Dutch, and that's your War of the Spanish Succession at that time, much criticized by Jonathan Swift and other people who were reasonable at the time. So you can see that these world supremacies, if we look at the Spanish example and the French example, they last for several decades. And I think what we're seeing now is the end of the sort of unipolar U.S. supremacy, which is not healthy, which has not been good for us here in the United States, very bad for us, very dangerous for the world, and, of course, marred by terrible crimes. It had a benign form, if you would, under Clinton, relatively benign, and then an extremely malignant form under Bush the Younger. And now under Obama, it's becoming totally crazy, because this is even crazier than Bush when you look at it in terms of what it's actually doing. So let's go right to the heart of the matter, is the speech made by Madame Clinton in Paris at the end of last week at the École Militaire of Paris, the military academy. And here she warns China about Iran. Let me also make the point before we go any further. For about 2 years, I have argued that an attack on Iran, be it by Israel, the United States, or some combination of this, was extremely unlikely because it basically would have meant giving up the entire strategy that the Brzezinski, Nye, Samuel Huntington faction had advanced as a replacement for the bankrupt approach of the neocons, the Cheney, Bush, Wolfowitz, Pearl, and company, which was not working, which had failed. So the idea was try something now different, but different meant you couldn't attack Iran in that way. The idea now of attacking Iran, I think, has at least come back on the table, and within the framework of what I said about the false flag warnings, it becomes more plausible. And the reason for this is not because of Iran. With Cheney and these people, it was the genuine desire to destroy Iran as an end in itself. In this case, it is not so much that as the desire to use Iran as a club, as a gambit against China. China is now the target of everything. There's a hysteria in the U.S. British ruling elite, which penetrates everywhere, which is I guess we can call it the Götterdämmerung complex, right? The twilight of the Anglo-American gods. They think that their era on the world stage is ending, and in a way it is, although not in a way that any of us need to be concerned about. What they're concerned about is the ability to continue to conduct themselves with this overweening arrogance. Back in the 1960s, we had the arrogance of power with LBJ. Now we have the arrogance of impotence, because it's all done on the basis of an economy which has collapsed compared to what LBJ had. So the idea of an attack on Iran now becomes plausible in the following context. Mrs. Clinton at the École Militaire had just met with the Chinese foreign minister, that's Mr. Yang, Foreign Minister Yang of China, and she said to him, Yang, you have got to vote for sanctions against Iran in the UN Security Council? And the answer was no, Boucher, not doing it yet. But now we have to learn the Chinese for this. He's not going to do it. So she then paraded herself to the École Militaire. Now, it's reported by our Parisian fashion correspondents that Mrs. Clinton was wearing a new Parisian perfume, probably from the house of Sarkozy and Kouchner, which is called Chantage. Chantage meaning blackmail, because that was the essence of her little talk. The blackmail to China was this. It says, we demand, the U.S., the Anglo-Americans, the international community, as they like to put it, we demand that you vote for crippling sanctions against Iran. The Chinese, of course, have this veto in the Security Council. This is a big problem for the Anglo-Ams. So we demand that you vote against your best friend, or a good friend, or a possible good friend, Iran. What does this mean for China? Well, if China alienates Iran, they lose 10, 12% of their oil right away, because that's the oil that would normally go from Iran to China. There's also a matter of about $80 billion of development projects, which the Chinese have contracted to do in Iran. That will be lost. There's also several hundred billion of future oil purchases, and then there's the only hope of having a guaranteed overland pipeline from Iran to Pakistan to China to get the oil without going on the water where the British and the U.S. are going to rule the roost. Back in a minute.